This week's episode deals with gang stalking, which we've never covered on the show before.
It's a crazy story that started with one random tweet and escalated to the point where our guest is in the fight for his life.
I'm so amazed at how hard he's been fighting for justice for himself and others in the same situation.
This episode is going to make our listeners rethink everything they put on the internet.
In the summer of 2018, when I tweeted out that I have never personally found Norm Macdonald to be funny. And as innocuous as that may sound, that was enough of an infringement that this group of stalkers decided that they were going to dedicate years to trying to drive me to suicide over it.
I'm Jaimie Beebe.
And I'm Jake Deptula. On today's episode of Strictly Stalking, we're chatting with Patrick Tomlinson, a sci-fi writer who's being gang stalked by a group of cyberstalkers.
Patrick says that he became the target of a coordinated cyber campaign focused on destroying his online presence through harassment, intimidation, review bombing, and false reporting after he tweeted a comment about finding a well-known comedian unfunny.
Patrick reveals that this group created a multitude of impersonation social media accounts designed to publicly defame and humiliate him, while they committed acts of doxing and swatting against him and his family.
The cyberstalking campaign is continuing to this day, and he says the group's goal is to drive him to suicide.
Patrick, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So tell us a little about yourself.
I'm a 40-year-old science fiction writer living in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I enjoy the Packers, motorcycles, building models, and shooting guns.
Have you always been into sci-fi?
Oh, yes. This is a passion of mine going back to my very early days as a 4 or 5-year-old when some videotapes of Star Wars miraculously found their way onto my parents' porch. And I probably watched them each about 100 times before I turned 10.
What are some of the things that you've written?
My first book and the first series of books was through a publisher called Angry Robot, and they were, the first book was called The Ark. It's basically a murder mystery set on a 10-mile-long starship. And we've actually adapted that into a screenplay, which is getting kicked around right now after it was optioned about a year ago. So there's some movement on that, too.
Well, that's exciting. Do you want to tell us what gang stalking is?
Well, gang stalking, in the sense that I've been experiencing it, is simply being targeted by an unknown number of anonymous online people. I've been getting gang stalked for almost 2 years now online from a group of people that had originated on Reddit as a dedicated cyberstalking community. This is all that they've done for years, and in fact, many years before they ever came across me. I was certainly not the first target of their ire. This was a community that prided itself on anonymously trying to destroy people's lives, just innocent people that they picked kind of at random.
And how did this gang stalking start?
Well, it started in the summer of 2018 when I tweeted out that I have never personally found Norm Macdonald to be funny. And as innocuous as that may sound, that was enough of an infringement that this group of stalkers decided that they were going to dedicate years to trying to drive me to suicide over it. I mean, that's not a supposition on my case. That is their publicly and proudly stated goal.
What happened in the very beginning? You made this tweet, and then what was the first things that they started doing? How did you find out you were being gang stalked?
I didn't know it at the time, but the first thing that they did was that they initiated a mass false reporting campaign against my Twitter account. My Twitter account was @StealthyGeek, and at that time, a little over 2 years ago, it had 36,000 followers, something like that. And it was also my main form of self-promotion as an author. It's how I, attracted new readers. It's how I was able to interact with readers when I, wasn't able to make it to conventions or book signing events, that kind of thing. I was also pretty well known as a political pundit back then. I went viral with a number of different tweets that had gotten quite a bit of traction and been retweeted by big accounts, had been, gotten me interviews with places like Salon Magazine, things like that. So what they did was that they had organized to have dozens and dozens and dozens of them make false reports of specific tweets that I've made. And so in so doing, they've tricked Twitter's moderation algorithms and their moderation team into suspending my account permanently. And that was a pretty big blow. And I didn't know where it was coming from. And the tweet that actually got me suspended the first time was actually very innocuous. And it was something that, you see people say some variant of it, dozens of times a day. It was not in any way against any of Twitter's established terms of service. But because of the scale of the number of reports, it's almost like a DDoS attack. It was just a way of tricking Twitter into believing that there was a problem where there was none, because Twitter makes the mistake and continues to make the mistake of just assuming that reports are made in good faith, when in fact their entire reporting system has been weaponized by trolls and stalkers like this in order to deplatform people who aren't actually breaking any of Twitter's rules. I'm not the first person that's happened to, and I won't be the last either. But so I woke up one day in September, I think it was, of 2018, to see that my Twitter account had been permanently suspended for reasons that I didn't understand at all. It was not until a sharp-eyed follower and reader of mine brought it to my attention that there was this group of people on Reddit who were just absolutely dancing in the streets over the fact that they had managed to get my account suspended. And when I started looking into them, that's when I realized just exactly what had occurred and just how large the scale of the problem was. And as I said, this was a group this was an infamous group. They were the most hated subreddit on the entire website, and they were proud of it. But I was hardly the first person that they had done something like this to. I was just the most recent.
Tell us a little bit about Reddit. Can you kind of explain a little bit about how they interact on Reddit and how they would be able to do this to somebody?
Well, Reddit is, I think it's like the 5th largest website in the world. I mean, it's enormous. But yes, they organize into communities or subreddits, and and it can be anything. It can be cross stitch. It can be somebody who's following a particular sports team. It can be people who build models. It can be absolutely anything. Photographers. The list goes on and on. But in this particular case, it was a subreddit community of about 30,000 subscribers, I think, at the time, that were fans of the defunct shock jock radio show Opie and Anthony, which has been off the air now for 7 or 8 years, something like that. But yeah, so these people were from all over. They were from all over the U.S. and, in fact, all over the world. We know quite a few of them were in England and parts of Europe as well. But these were, had started out as just fans of this show. But the entire culture of the show over the span of years had been built to create this sort of gang stalking group. They had, the hosts of the show themselves had referred to their fandom as pests, because they would direct them at targets. They would send them after people. They had a feud with Howard Stern, because they were both based in New York back in the early mid 2000s, and they had sent legions of their fans to go and disrupt Howard Stern's live appearances and places that he was speaking or doing promos or whatever. And then that went on from there to become an even larger problem when they started directing their fans to attack people online, either through harassing emails or doxing their personal information, harassing their families, harassing them at their jobs, or just, they weaponized their fan base. And then when their show fell apart and went off the air, that group still existed, but now they didn't have anyone, picking targets for them. So they started casting about and finding their own people to mess with. And this was something that had been cultivated for years, and then it just took on a life of its own and didn't go away, even though the show eventually died.
When did you find out about other victims of their attacks?
Oh, immediately. As soon as you went to the subreddit, there was, each thread was about a different person that they were trying to screw with. Each thread was about some new campaign of online terrorism against, another random person. They had gone after the comedian Patton Oswalt, for example. They were trying to start internet rumors that he had murdered his wife so that he could remarry the person that he ended up marrying, after her death. That never really took, because it's Patton Oswalt and he's got, millions and millions of fans, but that was the attempt. Other people that they had gone after included, there's a singer-songwriter named Logan Lynn out of Portland, Oregon. And they had when they first took notice of me, they had already been messing with him for 6 months or more. In fact, he got them written up in People magazine over how badly he was getting gang stalked by this exact same group.
Can you explain for our listeners that don't know what doxing is?
Certainly. Doxing is simply the act of releasing someone's private information, whether it be home address, telephone number, email addresses, private information that you don't want getting out in order to hurt that person. In order to make it so that people can more easily harass them in real life. Like I've been doxed dozens and dozens of times, and as a result, I get harassing text messages from this group every single day. I get harassing calls and voicemails every day. They know my home address, so they send me, they sign me up for all this junk mail. They send fraudulently ordered delivery food to my house every day, so that I have to go down and patiently explain to the person who thinks they're about to get a tip that no, I did not order this food. No, you're sorry, you wasted your time. And especially this is happening during COVID, when a lot of these smaller places, they can't be affording to waste the food and manpower when they're just holding on anyway. I mean, it's an act of fraud that is stealing from local businesses, and it inconveniences me, but it doesn't hurt me in any way. But here's this poor delivery driver who just wasted half an hour of their time when they could be making a real run, and now they make no money. It's just again, it goes on and on like that. So yeah, doxing is just the act of releasing private information to make it easier for other people to harass someone or put them in physical danger too. You can send crazy people to their house. You can call the police on them once you know that information.
It's that time of the year again to go holiday shopping for all my friends and family.
Knowing you, everyone will be getting something well thought out, eco-friendly, and logical.
You're totally right. I'm gifting everyone each and every this year.
You're giving everyone deodorant for the holidays?
Not just any deodorant. Each and every is a natural deodorant that has been found to provide odor protection equal to an antiperspirant without the aluminum, so it keeps me odor-free all day.
That sounds well thought out.
It is. And it's vegan, cruelty-free, and sustainably sourced, right down to the plant-based packaging. In fact, it's actually the first eco-conscious carbon-negative material used in deodorant.
That's eco-friendly.
And it goes on smooth, doesn't leave any residue or stains on my clothes, and feels great on my skin. Not like other natural deodorants.
And that's logical.
It is. They have lots of great organic scents like rose and vanilla, coconut and lime, even cannabis and green tea, made with just 6 simple ingredients like Dead Sea salt and coconut oil.
So there really is something for everyone. But what about our listeners?
For a limited time, our listeners get 30% off their first purchase.
Wow, you really outdone yourself this year.
Visit eachandevery.com/stalking today and use promo code STALKING for 30% off your first purchase. Order now.
That's promo code STALKING at eachandevery.com/stalking.
Jaimie, what time is it?
Jake, you know it's wine o'clock.
I knew you'd say that.
Of course. My favorite part of wine o'clock is that I just got my order of usual wines shipped right to my door.
And which is your favorite flavor?
To be honest, they're all my favorite. They have a red blend, a rosé, and a sparkling white wine. I've been using the sparkling white to make mimosas with my girlfriends for Sunday brunch.
And each bottle is 6.3 ounces, which is a heavy pour or about a glass and a half of wine. So no more pouring that wine down the sink if you don't finish the bottle. And because of the single-serve format and bottle design, you won't have flat bubbly or stale rosé for brunch. It's made for the modern drinker.
Very true. And usual wines are made in California at places like Napa, Sonoma, and Santa Barbara with minimal intervention, 0 sugar, and 0 additives.
They're produced using natural, sustainable grapes harvested every fall. They're picked at optimal ripeness to ensure all sugar will be fermented completely until the wines are dry, with no residual sugar, so that all that's left over is delicious, clean wine.
They have a special holiday product out now called the Usual Reserve. It's an ultra-premium limited edition Mount Veeder Cabernet Sauvignon, the most special wine yet, just in time for the holidays. Hailing from one of the most celebrated plots of land in all of Napa, this Cabernet Sauvignon is concentrated and rich with just enough grip.
You can gift it to someone special or keep it all for yourself. The holidays, as usual.
Go check out their website at usualwines.com and use our discount code STALKING for $8 off your first order and try your first glass on us.
That's usualwines.com and use discount code STALKING. And we'd like to thank our latest Patreon members: Kieran H., Cassandra H., Shayna J., Melissa S., Jenny W.,
Hannah S., Alyssa H., Maggie, Rachel H., and Holly. Thank you so much for joining us on Patreon.
When you first were doxxed, did you know that that's what that was?
Well, I did actually, because I have quite a few friends in the community formerly known as Gamergate, not the people doing the doxing or doing the gamergating, but the targets of those people. So doxing is something that we've been familiar with for a number of years now as a tactic for harassment and terrorism.
When did you start finding out more about what was happening?
Well, once we identified where they were coming from on Reddit, which was the R. Opie and Anthony subreddit, we were able to start watching them much more closely and see, watch them coordinate and plan. And so we could start anticipating their moves and their tactics. In fact, once they really got going after me on Reddit, and they were doxing myself and my family on Reddit. They were photoshopping myself from pictures taken from my Instagram or from my Twitter into pornographic and sexually harassing images, or taking tweets of mine and changing them to make it look like the original tweet was racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, whatever, and then spreading that around, trying to make it look like I had actually said those terrible things. But once we got a measure of who was doing it and how they were doing it, we got a pretty good idea of just how many actual drivers of it there were. And even though there were something like 30,000 people on the subreddit, there was ever only maybe a few hundred that were actively engaged in this, what I call performative cruelty. The rest of them were just kind of hangers-on that were there for the laughs. But even that started drying up because they harassed me on Reddit so much that I actually managed to get the Reddit administrators to change the site's harassment policies for the first time ever in order specifically to eradicate this group from the website. And so they had their subreddits banned, I think like 70 of them, because they just kept trying to remake new ones or take over other ones so that they could continue this targeted campaign. But Reddit admin just kept hunting him down relentlessly over the course of a few months. And they also banned, thousands of their accounts, specifically for being involved in this campaign. And then after that, they left Reddit, and most of the group just broke up entirely. But now they have moved on to their own web forums, where the real diehard sociopaths are the only ones left. And there's maybe, instead of a few thousand, there's a few dozen, and of those, maybe only six or eight of them actually take any action anymore. The rest of them are, like I said, just there watching.
Do you think that they connect with other groups that are into like doxing and harassment and things like that? I mean, is this basically a small part of a bigger underground network that they connect to, or are they kind of an isolated group?
Well, there are certainly other groups. There's no doubt about that. But this particular group, I know that they have tried to reach out to other groups in the past with very little success, because those other groups are usually, in some ways, they're more organized, and they have specific targets in mind, either for political reasons or for religious reasons or whatever the case may be. And so this group has in the past gone to places like 4chan in Kiwi Farms, and 8chan, which are just absolute terrible places with awful people on them, trying to recruit new members into their campaign against me. But they never have any success doing it, because the other people are like, what is your weird obsession with this mid-list sci-fi author from Wisconsin? We don't understand. You people are crazy, which they are. But no, their efforts have been rebuffed up to this point.
Did you ever reach out to any of them during this time, or did you ever like reply to any of the harassment on Twitter or on Reddit or anything like that?
Oh, I didn't. I never reached out to any of them. These are terrible people, and they're all criminals. They deserve to be in prison. But I would always respond when they would lie about me or lie about my family. That doesn't get to stand. You don't get to go out and slander and libel me without someone there to correct the record. Absolutely not. When they're out there saying things, that I'm a pedophile, that I can't see my daughter because I raped her. No, we're not going to allow that to stand. The only reaching out, and I don't think you can call it that, but the only responding I ever made to any of them was to correct the record, and that was it.
What are some of the things that you've had to go through in the last 2 years that they've done?
They have just recently got my Twitter account resuspended, even though I was up to something like 48,000 followers, and it's still my main source of self-promotion, especially now that COVID's here and we're not doing conventions anymore and we're not doing in-person author signing events anymore. So that was a pretty significant blow, and it was the exact same thing. They managed to mass false report a number of tweets that I made, and in fact, the tweets that got me suspended from Twitter were calling one of my stalkers who had been stalking me for 2 years every day, endangering my family, putting us through hell. I called them a stalker, and I said, you're under criminal investigation, and you are facing prison time for what you're doing. And Twitter was like, oh, well, you're wishing harm on them, and you're targeting that person for harassment. And I'm like, you're out of your minds, Twitter. But they have never, they have not responded to my appeals on that. They actively encouraged and validated literal felons in their assault on me. And then Twitter either doesn't see it that way or doesn't care. In some ways, that's the most minor thing that's happened. I mean, my house has been swatted twice now because of these people. The first time it happened was back in June, and I think it was a Thursday night. It was about 11 o'clock at night, and my wife and I are just sitting binging something on Netflix. I don't even remember what. We were several drinks into the evening because it was 11 o'clock during lockdown, and there's a loud knock at the door. I answer in a bathrobe, not knowing what's going on, and there are two uniformed Milwaukee Police Department officers with their hands on their guns, demanding to know where the children are. Which I did not respond to that accusation as tactfully as I could have. So that led to quite a little argument on my porch. But that was the point. I mean, they were trying to get the police to come up and shoot me dead on my porch. That's what they were trying to do. And the reason that I came to find out later that the reason the police had come was because one of these stalkers had created a fake Craigslist ad that they put up in the local Milwaukee Craigslist in the free section, using my name, using my telephone number, using my real home address, and claiming that I was giving away free sausage to homeless people, which I had made out of the bodies of African-American children that I had kidnapped and ground up into pepperoni in my basement. And so then they used that fake ad that they left up, which was only up for a very short time before Craigslist looked at it and went no, and took it down. But they used the existence of that ad to call in an anonymous tip to the Milwaukee Police Department, which led to armed officers with their hands on their guns, ready to shoot me. And that's the point of swatting. I mean, you're trying to use the police as an executioner anonymously over the internet so that you don't get your hands dirty.
I think I would have definitely been scared if the cops came and hands on guns like that.
Oh, I'm past scared. Way, way past scared. But I mean, those are just small things. Well, that wasn't a small thing. But I mean, as I mentioned earlier, I get harassing texts every single day. I get harassing phone calls every single day. They've sent death threats to my one of my publishers had received a death threat saying that just so you know, I'm going to be murdering one of your authors, Patrick Tomlinson, at Summerfest today. I've already cut the brake lines on his blank motorcycle, and I've kidnapped his blank wife. And then all of a sudden I got a call from my publisher on my phone, and I was at Summerfest when that was going on, because they knew I was, because they monitor my Instagram, they monitor my Twitter, my Facebook, they obsess over every single detail of my life. So they knew where I was, and they knew that they could get a rise out of someone that way. And so I got a frantic call from my editor saying, don't get on your bike and call Nikki, make sure she's okay. And of course, nothing had happened, but that was an act of terrorism. Sending death threats like that over the internet is a felony. That's a crime. That was a criminal thing that they did, and it wasn't the only one. It probably won't be the last either. But yeah, I would get rape threats against my wife pretty constantly. There's a restaurant and bar that I like to hang out at. It's one of the places I like to sit down and write. I've written a couple of books, a couple of screenplays there, and they spent months calling that place dozens of times a day, asking for me, asking them why they're sheltering this known child molester, Patrick Tomlinson, trying to get me kicked out of there, trying to make it so that it was such an inconvenience for the staff there, and intimidate the staff so much that they would ask me not to come back anymore. They did the same thing to my gym, the gym that I go to. They called in pretending to, or emailed in, I'm sorry. They emailed in pretending to be one of the female members there, saying that I was taking, upskirt spy shots, during my workouts, trying to get me thrown out of the gym, which of course, none of this stuff works, because once you actually talk to a real human being and you can show them, this group's web forums where they're just cackling with glee about all these terrible, awful things that they're trying to do to people, then it becomes immediately obvious what's really gone on. And, it's like the point is always to damage my reputation, which they've done by impersonating me in a number of different ways too. They've run around, they've run around Reddit, they've run around Twitter, using my name, signing up with my email address, because my email address is obviously public. So they create fake accounts that way. They use my bio, my taglines, stolen images, so that they can look to be me. And then they run around harassing women, prominent women in my industry. They run around saying really horrible racist things, anti-Semitic things to people, hoping that they believe that I'm the one actually saying them. Trying to damage my professional reputation, trying to damage my personal relationships that way. They have in the past figured out how to directly spoof my email address so that they can send emails and they will look exactly like they came from me, which they then use to, again, especially go after women, because they perceive them to be more susceptible to this kind of thing. Go after women and while pretending to be me, say, hey, I'd love to meet up for lunch, or, my wife's out of town, maybe we could hook up, or, just crap like that, trying to make it look like I'm this sex pest. They've done the same thing with my phone number, because they've figured out how to make calls imitating my phone number. They've called me pretending to be my wife, just so that they could get me on the phone and record me on the phone, thinking I'm talking to Nikki, until I realize immediately that I'm not, just so that they can then put those sound links back on their little web forums, so that they can laugh about it. These people are true sociopaths, and this is like, when I explain the situation to other people, it just doesn't sink in usually until a while later. But this is all these people do. They have no other interests. They have no hobbies. I'm fairly certain they don't have jobs. They do nothing else but this. They think about nothing else. They talk about nothing else. The only thing in their entire lives is trying to end mine. That's it. That's their whole world. Has been for 2 years now.
When all this started happening, and you're going through like months and at this point years, where did you turn for help? I mean, obviously, the police are reacting to swatting, so that's on their record, all this stuff. So where are some of the places you could turn for help?
Nowhere. I had to invent help. There was nothing in place to deal with this. Like, for example, with Twitter, like, I did everything I was supposed to do. I went through the automated reporting and appeals process and explained very patiently what had happened. But that appeals process doesn't take into account anything that happens off of Twitter. They don't even let you include links. So like I was not able to show them all the evidence of who these people were, what their goals were, how they, committed these attacks against me. And so Twitter didn't care, just didn't care at all. In fact, it took hiring a lawyer and spending $5,000 in legal fees in order to draft up a letter that they could send over to a contact that they had within Twitter and bypass the entire, automated official system before they would take a look at it. And then they did, and the evidence was overwhelming that I had been the target of this kind of false reporting attack. And after 11 months, my account was finally reinstated. But that lasted for 14 months until just about 3 or 4 weeks ago, when they managed to trick Twitter again into suspending my now much larger account again, in using the exact same cheat that they had used in the first place. And now we're trying to get through to Twitter to do it again and explain it again, and they're just not listening. They want no responsibility for the juggernaut that they've created here. They really don't. As far as Reddit was concerned, like it was me submitting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of complaints and hundreds of what are known as DMCA takedown requests. DMCA refers to a law that was passed in the early 2000s called, basically it says if you have copyrighted material that someone else is using without permission, then there has to be a reporting system in place for you to get it taken down by any of these large platforms. And so they had violated my copyright either by using stolen images of the covers of my books that they had manipulated, or my own copyrighted images that I had taken or created myself, or like headshots of myself which were used in the books, which obviously I have copyright on too. It was only through making those reports hundreds and hundreds of times that finally Reddit admins were like, all right, this is taking up a lot of our time. This is a real problem, and we need to address it. And they did. And it was the same thing with there's a site called Goodreads, which is it's a book review site. That's what it does. It's got millions of users, but it allows you to share and talk about and review the books that you read. Well, with Goodreads, as another way to try and attack and destroy my career, they created hundreds upon hundreds of sock puppet accounts so that they could leave thousands of fake one-star reviews on all of my books as a way to drag down my rankings and drag down my ratings and hopefully tank my sales. This was so flagrant, though, that between myself and a professional organization that I belong to as an author called the Science Fiction Writers of America, we were able to back channel with people within Goodreads and say, okay, this has happened to other people too, but this case is especially egregious. And they did the same thing. After enough pressure, they finally changed the way that they allow people to create accounts, so that it was much harder for people to create these massive number of sock puppet accounts, and then scrubbed off almost all the fake reviews from all my books. If you look at my ratings now, they're much closer to accurate, whereas before, with thousands of fake reviews dragging them down, they were all in the 1.5 star range. So it has been pulling teeth. It absolutely has been, because there aren't established channels for you to go to with any of this. So you have to go and blaze and create your own.
Did you ever reach out during this time to any other gang stalking victims or anybody who they specifically targeted that you knew about from your research?
Oh, yes. If the gentleman I had mentioned earlier, his name is Logan Lynn, the songwriter. I had reached out to him, and between the two of us, I showed him, especially when it was so prevalent on Reddit, I showed him what I was doing with the DMCA takedown reports and what I was doing with, the threats of violence reports and so forth. And then we coordinated. Whenever I saw anything that they were doing against him, I would send him links so that he could make the reports. And same thing with him. If he saw anything that was a direct attack on me that I hadn't noticed yet, he would send the link over, and we became pretty effective at that. they moved on from him mostly because I was such an effective enemy, one that they'd never come across before. I mean, when they lost their entire subreddit community, that was an enormous blow to them. They'd never suffered anything even resembling consequences before. I mean, they'd been voted the most notorious and hated subreddit group on Reddit like 2 years in a row, and they were proud of it. I mean, they took pride in being the most hated people on the entire website. This is the kind of mentality that we're dealing with here.
People that they were reaching out to try to ruin your reputation. What happened there? How did those people respond to that?
Well, some of them fell for it. Some of them had no idea who I was, and so I was just a random. As far as they knew, I was just a random person that was, reaching out saying these horribly sexist and offensive things to them, or in some cases, incredibly racist things. And so some of them fell for it. And in fact, one young lady who I won't name names, but she actually put a response that she had gotten from one of them pretending to be me up on Twitter. And within, I don't know, like it ended up getting 100,000 likes and it was shared like tens of thousands of times. And, I had to reach out to her and go, okay, listen, here's what's actually going on. That did not come from me. That came from one of this group pretending to be me. You're not the first person they've done this to. And eventually she realized that was probably the truth. But she never actually corrected the record publicly, which was kind of annoying. I wasn't real happy with her about that. But anyway, but others had been a little bit more savvy. And there have been a couple of women who, just sent me a PM or something and said, hey, is this you? And then, a screen grab of whatever email or message that they had gotten, on their blog or whatever. And I say, yep, nope, definitely not me. And then that almost always led to, finding another more powerful friend and another, powerful ally against this kind of thing. One of them, she had experienced something very similar to this. She had been getting stalked. In fact, her home had been swatted too. And it had happened, and her teenage son was the only person home at the time when the police showed up expecting trouble. And so, I mean, that was a terrifying evening for obvious reasons. But so she, we had that in common, even though we didn't have an awful lot of other things in common. But we made a heck of a connection over that. And so I was very grateful to her for not jumping the gun and for actually going and, looking up and seeing who I was and realizing that I'd been dealing with this for, well over a year at that point, before reaching out to me and before trying to drag me on Twitter.
And how do your friends and family deal with this?
Well, my friends and family are often having to deal with this themselves because of the fact this group not only doxes me, not only doxes my wife, but that they have gone off and doxed our entire families. My mother-in-law, my brother and sister-in-laws, they all get harassing texts. They all get the voicemails. My parents have gotten harassing letters in the mail, postcards and stuff like that. They've gone after my little brother, saying that he's developmentally disabled and that he should just end it all, which neither of those things are true. They've gone after my ex sister-in-law, who has nothing to do with any of this, but they've been harassing her once every other week for months now. And she's not involved in this in any way. It's madness. So yeah, all my friends and family know about it, because oftentimes they're having to deal with it directly. This group, for a little while, their new favorite thing was to go to the online obituary pages of family members after they died, so that they could leave harassing comments. And like in one case, there was a bunch of the deceased person was Jewish, and so they left Nazi iconography all over it, and references to Zyklon B and ovens and all this, just because they think it's funny to go deface a defenseless deceased person's obituary. I mean, it's the level of inhumanity and cruelty here is just something that's very difficult for normal, well-adjusted human beings to wrap their heads around. Like, this is what fun looks like to these people. And it makes no sense. And the only crime that any of these deceased people and their families had committed was either being related to me by blood or by marriage, or being being friends with me, or a professional, someone else who's connected to me just via the fact that we're colleagues in the sci-fi writing industry. And it's all meant to be just constant psychological torment, against their victims and against me, against my family, as they try to further their ultimate publicly stated goal of destroying my life and driving me to kill myself. These people will not stop until they've killed someone. They absolutely won't.
When did you actually turn to the police for help?
I first turned to the police after the first sets of death threats started coming in. And in the beginning, I went to the police and said, yes, I am receiving death threats as I am the target of a mass stalking campaign based off of Reddit. And the desk officer's question was, what is Reddit? And so you can imagine how helpful that first round with the cops was. Not tremendously at all. But since then, especially after the swatting incidents, that has been taken much more seriously.
Do you feel that it's gotten a lot worse during COVID with the stay-at-home orders?
I can see why someone would think that, but no. I don't think that the majority of the people involved in this were really impacted by COVID all that much. A, because they wouldn't listen to restrictions anyway because they're sociopaths, and B, because I don't think any of them have any full-time jobs anyway. This was all they were spending all their time doing for the last 2 years anyway. I don't think that COVID and the fact we have 250,000 casualties from it at this point really affects them at all. This is all they've been doing for 2 years, and it's all that they've been doing since the lockdowns and since COVID crept up on us back in March.
During these attacks from Reddit, from Twitter, from all the different sources, the swatting, the doxing, did these things all happen at the same time, or was it, you'll get attacked on Twitter, you'll get attacked on Reddit, then a doxing? Is there any sort of pattern to how the crimes have been committed?
I mean, in the beginning, it was constant and it was from every direction, but that was because in the beginning, when they still had their subreddits, there were a lot more of them. So you could have more of a division of effort, so they could be coming from all different sides at once. Since then, and since I keep getting them booted around the internet until they finally ended up on their web forums, which are hosted by Kiwi Farms, which is awful people. Once they've settled down there are so few of them left, and so few of them actually doing anything, that now it does seem to come in more in waves. As they focus on one thing, and then get distracted or come up with a new idea, and so then try to come at me from a different angle. So yeah, it's never really let off, but at least now it's a little bit more containable, because I can, okay, here's the thing that they're doing this week, or here's the thing that they're going to be doing today. And I don't have to I only have to put out one fire at a time instead of 10.
Can you speculate what kind of criminal charges that someone would face if they're, accused of cyberstalking, doxing, swatting, respectively? The
thing about it is that, with swatting especially, there are a few municipalities throughout the country where swatting is now a crime. It's a serious crime. But with most, in most states, the laws have not caught up with the reality yet. And we see that with technology all the time. So swatting here in Wisconsin, we can call it swatting, but as far as the law is concerned, it's filing a false police report. Swatting is attempted murder. That's what it is. But filing a false police report just doesn't quite have the same weight to it. It's still a crime, but here it's a misdemeanor. Some of the other things that they are guilty of are not nearly so innocent, though. I mean, the telephone harassment over months, and especially over so many different people, well, that's a felony because it crosses state lines. The telephone harassment of a local business and the fax harassment of a local business, because one of the things they were doing for a while there was blasting this pub and restaurant that I go to with faxes of either libelous material claiming that I'm a woman beater, and that should, that they're the police coming to arrest me, or images of me photoshopped so that I'm blowing Donald Trump, just stuff like that, like being faxed to this place. Well, that's criminal. That's a felony also. That's felony telephone harassment. When they called in, asking if I was present and pretending that they were the Milwaukee Police Department, executing an arrest warrant for known child molester Patrick Tomlinson. Well, that's a felony. You just can't do that kind of thing. Impersonating the police is a no-no, and that got the police's attention as well. They get a little bit cross about that kind of behavior. And there are others. The death threats sent over the internet. That's a felony. Period. That's illegal. The constant suicide demands. That's a little bit more of a legal gray area. There are some jurisdictions where trying to push someone towards suicide is seen as attempted murder, which it absolutely should be. But in almost every case that's actually been prosecuted, it's because it's done post-mortem. It's done after the person has committed suicide. And so, having those kinds of crimes investigated and prosecuted before there's an actual death, that's proving challenging.
Do you think that you'll see any of these people in person? Are you fearful for your life that they're going to come off the internet and reach out in person and hurt you?
They have already come off the internet. They have taken spy shots of me in person. I was not aware that they were there. They were taking shots like cowards because they are cowards. But they took shots of me at this pub that I had mentioned. They took shots from the far side of the bar, on a crowded day, using their camera phones so that they could then upload them later and say, I was so close and he never knew it. There have been instances of them leaving harassing and threatening graffiti along, routes that they know I walk, just to try and intimidate me, make me feel unsafe in my home. That doesn't work because I'm 6 foot tall, 225 pounds, and an experienced and trained fighter. So if I ever do any see of them in person, it will turn out very quickly and very poorly for all of them. And they all know it, which is why they don't show up, which is why they don't make themselves known. So no, I'm not afraid of them per se, not physically. Would I be afraid for my wife? Yes, absolutely. But no, what I'm afraid of physically is not of them, but from them. It's the swatting attempts. It's them, trying to coerce the police into being their executioners. It's them putting my name and faked tweets of faked racist tweets on various websites and in various chat rooms. During the protests that we were having here in Milwaukee against police brutality. Trying to trick. Organizers of these events and protesters in these events into thinking that I was, that I'm a racist, that I'm one of the people that they're trying to demonstrate against, and then leaving again our address, hoping that people will come and try and do us harm. It's them putting my information and our address up on Colfax, which was a very short-lived website It was a website where white supremacists were doxing the information of people in interracial couples. Now, I'm not in an interracial couple, but that doesn't matter to these stalkers. They still put our information up there because this was a hit list. This was supposed to be a hit list for white supremacists and fascists to go out and murder people in interracial relationships. The website only lasted a few days before the authorities found it and shut it down immediately. But I mean, that's my fear. Not that one of these people is going to show up, because they never will, but that they will coerce a crazy person or a fascist or even someone who I'm on their team, but they don't know who I am. That's the concern that we have. Is that we could be threatened, or I could be pushed into having to act violently against someone who's been misinformed about me by them. That's my concern.
Do you know anything about anyone in this group, like demographically, like their age, their location, their, just to get a sense of a type of person that they are?
They're overwhelmingly male. They're overwhelmingly white. Most of them live in the U.S. There are some that are overseas in places like England, and there's one just based on timestamps that we know he's probably somewhere in the South Pacific. Other than that, they rely entirely on anonymity to protect themselves, because no matter what they tell themselves, they know they're committing crimes. They know what they're doing is illegal. They know they're conspiring to cause harm and terror. That's what they get off on. So they are very careful about disguising everything about their identities. They don't trust even each other. They don't talk openly about who they are or where they live or what their job is or anything, even with one another. So, they use VPNs to hide their IP addresses. They use faked phone numbers, randomly generated phone numbers when they're calling or texting people, so that they can't be traced back that way. They use aliases. They almost never use their anything that could even be mistaken for a real name. Like that's how they defend themselves from any sort of real world consequences. But all of those things break down eventually if you have enough focus on a group. And you have the resources brought either by law enforcement or someone else to start cracking through, VPNs, start cracking through Tor nodes, that kind of thing.
Do you think they just have like that crazy mob mentality where, we see on the news people videotaping crimes and not helping? Is it something like that? Or how do you think that they interact with each other to get to this point?
It's the performative cruelty aspect of it. It's like whereas we would feel good by doing good things or helping people or donating to a cause, these people feel good by destroying other people. That's what brings them joy. That's what they see as humor. That's what they see as entertainment. And so, they just all kind of gravitated towards one another, and especially through the Opie and Anthony show, which, I never listened to very much of it. I had never heard of it before any of this came on, but then, of course, I got interested and listened to some, to some of the old episodes, and they're terrible. I mean, just awful. So, yeah, of course, the fan base would, maybe not exactly take after them, but it takes a certain type of person to have been attracted to and to be able to enjoy that sort of, entertainment in the first place. And so, yeah, then they built up a community, and they had with that community, they then had the power, the only power I think any of them have ever had in their lives, to go out and cause harm. And that's what they care about. That's what they love doing. It's just hurting people. And so once it's a power trip, and the fact that they are able to coordinate, these attacks and, get my Twitter suspended twice and impact my ability to self-promote and make a living. They think that's hilarious. It's a wonderful thing that they believe they've done. So yeah, once you've tasted some of that power, and then especially to have it taken away the way that they did, because they lost most of their power to terrorize and intimidate and make people afraid when their subreddit was taken away. So that's why they keep focusing on me, is because I'm the only person that's ever dealt them any real blows. Everyone else either just didn't have the time, didn't have the resources, or the tenacity, frankly, to keep going after them. And so they would, they'd delete their social media, or they'd take a break, and they'd run away, and they'd just give up. And I never have, and I never ever will.
What kind of emotional toll has this taken on you?
Well, I'm a pretty resolute guy, but it wears on you. It really does. But the way it's not so much the attacks on me. It's, the strain that it has put on my family relationships. It's the attacks on my wife. She wasn't involved in any of this. She didn't ask for any of this. This is what she signed on to when she said I do. It's the attacks on her family. It's the things that they text her mother, saying about her daughter. That's the emotional toll that it takes, and it's mostly a toll of anger. That this continues to go on, and it continues to happen to people that I love and care about, and I'm, despite my best efforts, have not been able to bring it to a conclusion yet. That's where it really wears on me personally.
Do you have a message for anyone participating in or thinking about participating in cyberstalking?
We're coming for you. What's happening now is that I'm able to build a network of not only other victims, but other strong allies who have seen it happen, who have had it happen to them, who have had it happen to family members. And they are and again, we're not naming names yet, but they are some very popular, very powerful people who have connections all over the place. In some cases in the highest levels of government. So we're not talking anymore about, going and getting Reddit to change its harassment policies. We're talking about legislation. We're talking about what laws need to be put on the books at state level or at national level in order to address this problem. I'm not looking anymore at just defeating this one little group of incels. I am looking at being part of the solution for everyone, not just myself and my family.
We've seen people come together like this to, harass and everything off places like social media, Reddit, Twitter. What do you think that, Twitter can do? What do you think that Reddit can do? Like, what else can they do to be able to not let this happen?
Well, Reddit's done a very good job. It took them, like all big organizations, it took them a little while to get up and running on it and recognize that there was a problem. But Reddit's security updates and the way that they've decided to handle these kind of harassment situations was very commendable. It's not that it doesn't still happen on the website, because of course it does, but the users have tools now that make it much easier to nip in the bud early. So, admin is aware that this is a problem and have taken steps to address it. So, they're much more proactive. Other websites like Facebook and especially Twitter, they're not. They seem actively disinterested in doing anything to fix the problem. Because if they start taking steps to address the problem, that is the same as admitting that there is a problem. And they just seem to want to be able to continue They're free websites. They don't have any responsibility for the content that goes up. But we know that isn't true. Otherwise, they wouldn't be banning people for any reason. They're kind of trapped between this spot where, they're wanting to moderate that kind of content while at the same time refusing to admit that it's their responsibility to do so, which is that doesn't work. It's either one or the other,
Patrick, what advice do you have for somebody at the moment that they know that they're being gang stalked? Like, what are the steps that they should take immediately once they know that?
Depending on the severity of it, go to the police immediately. Get it on file. Get a police report number right away, because not so much because necessarily the local police are going to be able to do anything about it. This is something that is it's more appropriate to a federal level because of jurisdictional issues. But because once you have that police report, when you go to, like the admins at Reddit, or you talk to the people at Goodreads, or, wherever, that's suddenly much more serious. It's not just one person saying, "Hey, I'm having this minor problem." Now all of a sudden, well, it's a legal matter, and that brings attention to it much more quickly.
I do notice that a lot of companies, they obviously take things a lot more seriously once you have a police report, because they know that you've gone on the record actually to report a crime or something that's, you've been victimized by.
Yes, absolutely.
What do you want to see happen to your stalkers?
I want to see everything that's coming to them within the limits of the law. They have committed serious crimes against my family, against other people, against businesses, and there are crimes on the books right now that they can be charged with and tried for. And I want to be in the courtroom when that happens.
Are you hoping this does go to a courtroom type of experience? Do you want to, look them in the eyes and let them know what they've done?
They've known exactly what my name is, what I look like, and who I am since they started this. And at the end of this, yes, I very much want to know exactly what they look like and exactly who they are, so that we can finally be on a level playing field, which I will win.
How are things now for you? You're still dealing with this on a day-to-day basis. It's something that you think about 24/7. What's an average day like for you trying to deal with this?
I mean, yes, anytime there's a flare-up of their activity, it's something that I have to go and deal with. Sometimes that means, a few minutes a day. Sometimes that means a couple of hours a day where I'm dealing with this. And this is all time that should be better spent, with me writing novels, writing more op-eds for for newspapers, just doing the things that actually advance my career and allow me to earn an income. And all of this has been time stolen from that.
And have you thought about going more public with this? Have you tried to be more public with this and what they're doing? Reaching out to newspapers, writing more stories about it, media?
Well, up until a couple of weeks ago here, when Twitter allowed them to steal my account again, I was very public with it there, and I had grown my account to almost 50,000 followers. And so, to some degree, that was because that allowed me to let the people around me, my friends, families, readers, let them know what was going on. So if they saw anything strange, they would be able to report back to me what had happened, and then we could go and deal with it. But now that my account has been suspended again for a second time by the same people using the same tactics, now I'm not able to connect nearly as quickly and efficiently with the people who were following me because they wanted to hear from me. So, this podcast interview is part of a new phase of trying to go more public with it and trying to bring more attention to it. For myself, certainly, but also for all the other victims of this, whether they be victims of this particular group or victims of this group in the future, or of any of the other stalking groups that we know are out there and are, and target people who don't have the experience and don't have the resources to fight back against it. This is a new phase. This is more about starting and expanding a national conversation about this, so that we can bring the sort of attention that it needs to get on the desks of lawmakers throughout the country, so that the laws can finally catch up with the reality of situations like this.
A lot of the people that we've had on this show, they do turn around and become advocates and, start helping others. Is that something that you might look into when, you talk about changing laws and being able to help other people? Is that something that you're looking forward to when this kind of ends?
Well, in a very big way, I already have. In the beginning, mostly because this group would pick random followers of mine or random friends of mine and start harassing them also, as a way of spreading the misery around, and make it in the hopes that it would make it so difficult to be associated with me that I would then lose even more professional relationships, even more friendships. That, of course, hasn't happened, because that's not how human beings work. People don't tend to blame the victim. That's kind of bad to do. And so, your friends and family and coworkers don't typically do that. But I have a good friend of mine who's I won't name, but he deals with depression. And once they found that out, they doxed his phone number and have been sending him text messages, for weeks, telling him to kill himself. Like I said earlier, these people will not stop until they are either stopped by law enforcement or they kill someone. That is their ultimate fantasy. And so, yeah, I want to be able to advocate in the future for victims and targets of people like this. I definitely look forward to that. I look forward to being a source of knowledge for how to deal with them, how to deal with the emotional fallout, how to deal with the feelings of isolation, how to come at them legally, how to come at them when dealing with the tech companies. Yeah, I want to be a resource.
Do you think that by speaking up in the media, it's going to make a difference?
Oh, absolutely. I think it will take time, and it will, this will be the first of hopefully many appearances, because when you're dealing with an unknown like this, I had no idea the scope of what a sustained cyber stalking and harassment campaign could look like over the course of years until it happened to me. And so it's going to take time to explain it to the public and explain it to lawmakers and legislators in a way that they're going to understand it and accept that it's real. Because you tell most of my story to most people, and they'll be like, "You can't be serious." And then it's like, "Nope, here's all the documentation. Here's the police report numbers. Here's all the screenshots. Here's all the eyewitness statements." And so it will be a process, but I do believe that it's long overdue for our laws to catch up with where the world is, especially where the internet is, because that's been the problem forever. Laws always lag behind technology, and there's no greater example of that than than the way we treat things online. You still hear politicians and police talk about as if there's a difference between what happens on the internet and what happens in the real world. It's like there's no separation, and there hasn't been for 15 or 20 years now. Like that attitude's crazy. Like when I first went to the police, their advice to me was to just delete my social media. It's like, social media is how I make a living. Like this is how I promote no, this is not an option for me. And the fact that it never even occurred to them that someone's experience could be that different with how they use the internet says a great deal about why our laws are so far behind where they need to be. Well, I would like to take this podcast as a starting point and a stepping stone, and be able to use it as a way to reach out to some of these other outlets and say, hey, give this a listen. This is what we're talking about here. Can we start to build a larger conversation around it, introducing this issue to the rest of the country, showing a range of the kinds of people that this has happened to, and the fact that it can really just happen to absolutely anybody. I mean, I'm far from being a celebrity. I'm a mid-list sci-fi author that maybe 20,000 people have heard of. I had a 50,000 follower Twitter account. That's good, but it's certainly not big. There's the big accounts are in the millions. So, the fact that it can happen to someone like me means that it can happen to damn near anybody.
When you've told people that you're being gang stalked, do they immediately believe you? Do you need to show them proof? Do they know what it is?
Most of the people that I know, I have a good reputation. I'm not, even though I write fantasy and science fiction for a living, I'm not prone to just, go out with making up wild conspiracies. So, I have a reputation for honesty and for getting my facts right. So it's less that they don't believe me and then they just find it so unbelievable. They're just blown away that this would be happening to my family, and mostly they're just blown away that anyone else could A, be that obsessively cruel, and B, have the time. I mean, who has the time for this? We're working. We have things to do. We have hobbies. And these people have none of those things. They just have their obsessive hatred. And that's the hardest part for most people to digest, is that anyone else would want to do this for years. For years.
Patrick, if any of your stalkers are potentially listening to this show...
Oh, they will be.
Okay. What do you want them to know?
I'm coming for you.
Patrick, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It was lovely.
If anyone out there is in need of help or is a victim of stalking, please reach out. You can find a list of resources on our Instagram at StrictlyStalkingPod.
You can watch our episodes on YouTube at youtube.com/StrictlyStalking. I'm Jake Deptula.
And I'm Jaimie Beebe. Thank you for joining us on today's episode of Strictly Stalking.
After the recording of this episode, Twitter reinstated Patrick's account at StealthyGeek, StealthyGeek.